All right, good morning and good afternoon to the folks on the East Coast. Welcome to another Sedaru live webinar. We're gonna talk today about the AWIA requirements and how you can use Sedaru to address those. We talked something similar a few months ago, a couple months ago now, I guess. But this is going to take a little bit of a different bent, and I'm going to talk a little bit more around applications and how you can use some of the Sedaru tools. But also I'm going to hit on some of the AWIA requirements pieces in and around that as well. I think, though, that most folks are generally familiar with a lot of the requirements around that, but we'll talk to that as well too. So we'll give folks a second to get settled here. We got a really good group of folks here today, big audience, which is exciting. So what I want to encourage everybody to do in terms of a couple logistics around how we run these Sedaru live webinars is webinar will be about 30 minutes. Probably have 20-25 minutes worth of content, but then time for your questions in there as well too. I like to answer as many questions as possible, so I really want folks to get as much information out of this as they can. So feel free to ask questions as we're going through the webinar. You will see in your interface, you have in this Zoom webinar interface, there's a button that says Q&A. If you hit that Q&A button and type a question in there, I'll see that on my end, and we'll do my best to get it answered as we're going through the content and talking about things. And then we'll also get it written out as well too. So there'll be a record of that, so we can make sure we get everything addressed as best as possible. And so I really encourage everybody, ask questions. I want you to get as much information as possible. If you don't already follow us on social media, let's go ahead and do that. We send a lot of emails to folks to try to let you know what's going on things, and to get your attention around the sort of latest and greatest with these Sedaru live sessions, but just in general with what we're doing and what the industry's doing. But email can be a pretty crowded space. So make use of some of these social media pieces. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and it's a great way to get information from us from a different channel in there. So super easy to do. So if you go on LinkedIn, search for Sedaru, you'll find us, and the same thing on Facebook or Twitter. And we'll get you lots of good information there here. So, all right, so we're going to talk about Sedaru applications, how they're used for compliance with the AWIA Act. And I'm going to hop into the software here. We're going to talk about some of this stuff right out of the gate, because I think it's it's interesting to look at the tools and talk about how those things can be applied. So those of you that aren't familiar, right, what we're talking about with the AWIA Act is essentially a requirement that utilities of really all sizes have to develop risk and resiliency plans for their utility. And the scope of those risk and resiliency plans is pretty broad. It covers really all manner of operations of the utility, from the physical infrastructure to cybersecurity to financial security. They're really designed to sort of understand and gauge what's the overall health of the utility, and then how prepared is that utility to deal with problems, right? So because the follow-up to that risk and resiliency plan is also having to submit a emergency response plan, right? So you're highlighting the problems from that risk and resiliency plan, and then talking about how you're going to deal with those on an emergency basis, and all the sort of pieces that go along with it. So from what we've been doing, for Sedaru, and Sedaru as a software product now is, in its 7th year, has really always dovetailed with the pieces of this. And so I'm gonna hit on a few different pieces of the software where we're really tied into some of these things and how those can be applied. So what you're looking at here is what's called Sedaru Outage, right? So Sedaru Outage is designed as as a one-stop place to be able to manage leaks or breaks that you might have in your utility. And so I'll show you real quick here. So I can go in, I can pick a location. What I'm looking at here is my GIS, right? So I can come in and I can pick a location on the map. I can come in and we'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see in more detail what's going on here. And so here you can see I've got pipes, I've got hydrants, I've got all of that information in here. I've got my valves, etc. But if I want to see what happens if I'm going to have a main break in a particular area here, I'll come in and say I've got a new outage event, and I'll put an X on the map. Okay, and when I put that X on the map, I can then give it a category. We'll say it's let's say it's a decent size leak, and I'll go ahead and run this simulation. And so when I run the simulation, what it's then going to do is look for all the valves that are going to have to be affected by this, right? And all of the or all the valves that are going to be needed to operate that. So in this case, we're talking about a set of 4 valves here. You got 2 almost on top of each other. I'll zoom in the middle here. You can kind of see that a little bit better. But I got a couple valves in here. You see there's looks like I'm on the border of there's a jumper or something that comes around here off this 20-inch here. So I've got 4 valves in here that come in that I'm going to have to deal with, and I've got a whole number of customers that are affected as well too. I'll zoom back out here so you can kind of see what that customer list looks like. I've got a whole pile of customers in here, right? So what's really neat about Sedaru Outage, right, and the way that it's done. So you'll notice as I go through and as I went through and calculated this, that it's pretty fast, right? It calculates pretty fast. And the reason it's doing that, let me save this, because I'll show you another feature of this, and it kind of explains why I think you're going to like this and why it's applicable here. So I'm just going to save this. Once you save the event at your utility, other folks can see it, right? So one thing that's neat about this is you can certainly use this for all manner of planned outages. Right? So as you're thinking about, oh, you've got to do a shutdown, I want to get it recorded, we're doing that shutdown, I want to see who's affected, et cetera, et cetera. What's cool here though too is, so now that I want to do this shutdown and I've got valves I got to close here, right? So I got an 8-inch in here, I got a 6-inch down here, I got another 6-inch, and I got this 4-inch gate valve here that was off that, what looked like some kind of jumper or something there, right? But let's go down, let's look at this 6-inch gate valve up here at the top, right? So I click on that. And what's neat here is I can come to do that shutdown. And what I'm going to do here is actually, let's say that it's actually not operable. So I'm going to mark it as inoperable. Okay, still open, but inoperable, and I'm going to save it. So when I save it, what's going to happen here is that it's going to actually now have to go find the next valve for me. Okay. So what's really cool, right? So now, so we got now a total of 5 valves that we got to deal with, right? So I got this same one here. I got another 6-inch one up here. So I got a total of 5 valves. One's inoperable, right? You notice that when we went to go do that I don't know, calculated really in a matter of a couple seconds, right? Or it showed, the results showed up in a couple of seconds. The way that we're doing that is that what Sedaru has done is we have created our own concept here of what we call outage management areas. And so we have algorithms in the background that take all this GIS data, whether it's in a geometric network or utility network or just sort of regular sort of points and lines, and are able to take all of that information and turn it into this network and then run an analysis on it. So for every pipe segment that you have in the system, it does a defined outage management area, or what we call an outage management, or OMA. You'll hear some of our great services team talking about OMAs, right? So what happens is in the background, Sedaru has already pre-calculated for your entire system. When any pipe segment in that system becomes unavailable, it knows exactly how many folks are going to be affected. It knows exactly how many valves are going to have to be operated on that. And so it already just by installing and setting up and using Sedaru Outage, you already have this pretty neat pipe criticality piece. And that's just using your GIS data as it exists today. Okay, so I think that's it's a pretty neat piece of functionality there. And I'll kind of show you, on the back end here in a second what that looks like. So you're getting all of that kind of information right for free. And with that, like I was saying here, I'll come back here. So I've got all these valves. I've also got this customer list in here. Right, so I got all these customers, everybody along this particular street that's in here. I can run my mouse over, I can see exactly who that is, right? What's also nice is if you are in your GIS or from your CIS system, depending on how you're doing it, flagging folks that are critical customers, right? So they're high use customers, they're a school, they're a government building, they're a healthcare facility, a daycare, all of those kind of things. All of those can be flagged in here as well too. So I can know that for each particular pipe segment in my system, how is that going to affect critical customers as well too? Right? So you've got this manner of really easy way to be able to do that. Here's the other nice thing with Sedaru Outage and the way that it can be deployed and set up is that we have throughout the country, we've got quite a few places where to support building risk and resiliency plans for around the AWIA Act, there are engineering consulting firms that are licensing Sedaru Outage for the benefit of their utility customer and using that in the creation of their risk and resiliency plan, right? So it gives you that kind of flexibility where your consultant can do work on your behalf, make use of these tools and to do it. And then what's nice is as this sort of software subscription SaaS model, once the consultant is done with the work that they needed to sort of work the risk and resiliency plan and to get that set up, you then have this tool at your disposal as well too, so that you've got something going forward on managing these breaks and leaks. I love the idea that I'm having to do a study that you're from a regulatory perspective required to get this done, and you're paying, in most cases, decent amount of money to have to do that. But if you make Sedaru part of that, you get this really nice tool at the end of it too that's going to help you actually run your utility better, right? So you're getting your regulatory requirement done plus being able to manage to get the benefit of in this case better sort of leak management. And just to give you an idea here, let me show you. I'll pop it up here on a PowerPoint slide. So what can some of that criticality output look like? This is part of what that looks like, right? So each segment in the system is going to get a criticality index defined. So you can sort of rank every pipe segment in your system. You can see the number of valves required, number of customers, number of hydrants that would be out of service as well too. So you can think about and assess things from a fire protection perspective, total length of pipe, all of that sort of stuff. And again, it's automatically figuring out all of this information for you right away. All right, let me show you. Here's a good time too. If folks have questions, feel free to go ahead and ask those questions. And I want to hit on a couple other, show you a couple other things here. I'm going to pop up here what's called Sedaru modeling, right? So Sedaru modeling is a little bit different than what we're talking about with Outage, right? So for folks that are familiar with hydraulic models, Sedaru modeling is running a hydraulic model, okay? Which in many places at many utilities is the GIS, right? Is a one-to-one relationship with the GIS. In many other cases, it's not. And it really depends on your particular, it just depends a lot on how your models have developed and what you're doing today with it, right? But one of the issues with hydraulic models through the years, and one of the reasons why you don't see them used as much, is that they often become the domain of really specialized engineers that only do hydraulic modeling, right? And if you look at traditional hydraulic modeling software, it really kind of reflects that, right? There's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of things you can do. And that's intentional because to calibrate a model and to build a model from scratch really does require a pretty specialized skill set. But if those models are built well and they've been calibrated, to use them and to run them and to get results out of them should be a relatively straightforward exercise. So what you see here with Sedaru modeling is I have the ability to run my hydraulic model directly from here. And to get all of the sort of results that might come out of that. And so the interface is designed to be really straightforward. I'll zoom out here. You can kind of see the whole, see this whole network will load in here. And so like I said, we're running that from a web browser. This particular system's got a whole bunch of sources and quite a bit of resiliency in it. You see over on the right, I've got scenarios. So I can come in and I can choose a couple different scenarios. I've got this MDD_SS stands for max day demand, and it's a steady state model, meaning it's running a snapshot. And you see that's 46 MGD. And then I've got a winter set of demands, right? That's an EPS. An EPS is an extended period simulation. So for the course of what we're going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and be able to, we're just going to talk about the max day steady state scenario, because that steady state snapshot works. But from a risk and resiliency perspective, you're typically wanting to look at things like max day conditions and some of that. You wouldn't want to look at winter, kind of low flow conditions to understand the resiliency of your system. So we'll choose that scenario in there. And obviously what you'll find is if you look at the models you have and talk to the consultants that you're working with, they'll have various options probably at their disposal. And in many cases, what you're going to find is the models that you have are something that was done and updated as part of your recent master plan. They probably use the hydraulic model to help come to some of the conclusions that were being drawn from that master plan and some of the planning purposes. And in many cases, though, that model's kind of sat on a shelf since then. So I really encourage, as you're putting this risk and resiliency plan together, if you're not using that model, dust it off, take a look at it, talk with your engineering consultant and understand, like, okay, how valid are things in here and what can I do with it? What's really cool from here, though, is I can do all kinds of things right from this web browser interface, right? So I could come in, you see here, I've got I've got a well in here. And so let me just zoom into that little spot. So I can come in here, I can click on that little section here. And the way that a well is represented in a hydraulic model is a reservoir with a pump. And if I come over here I selected that, right? And then I come over here to simulate. I can look at some different things. I can close pipes, I can close pumps. So let me come in here and I got this pump selected in here as well too. And so I can come in here and make all kinds of changes, right? So I can come in and say, hey, I want to change the overall demand in my system, right? And I want to see what that would look like, right? So I've got my normal max day conditions, right, are 46 MGD. What happens if that goes up 10%? What happens if that goes up 20%, right? So I don't know, let's say maybe let's put it in. Let's see what happens if I had to go to 52 MGD, right? Certainly can be a component of risk and resiliency planning depending on, what's been defined in your system, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to run that simulation really quick. The nice thing with that is I'm doing, couple of mouse clicks there, right? Simulation runs really successfully. It's going to immediately spit back hydraulic results for me, right? You see they're color coded on the map, so I can see exactly what that looks like. I'm going to scroll out a little bit so you can kind of get the whole system-wide map view. So you can at a glance, you see all the junctions are color coded. 50 to 75, 75 to 100 psi, right? You see some red, which is that's coming from suction sides of pumps, which you would expect. So you can see making a leap from 46 to 52 MGD doesn't have dramatic impacts. If I want to drill into the details of that, I can come in a little bit farther here and I can see specific spots in my system and where the changes might look like, for those spots. If we're in a steady state, so I'm not going to see changes to tank level or energy usage or those things, but you have that ability to run those kinds of calculations right from here. And again, the piece that I love about this as it applies to the AWIA standards is I can start doing these things myself. I can use the tools within here to run my own analysis and to run my own pieces of things and to see what happens. I can also come in and do similar sort of analysis that we were talking about in the with the similar analysis as we were kind of looking at on outage, but now assess it from a hydraulic perspective. So let's say, let me come over here. I'm going to select let's select one of these spots over here. And we could say that this serves a critical customer. We want to check that area. So I'm going to come in here. I've got this this spot on this cul-de-sac, but I'm going to come here and say simulate. We don't care about the demand changes, so I'm going to get rid of that. But let's say I want to just get a fire flow out of here, right? I want to see what happens if I had to get, let's say I had to get 1,000 GPM out of there. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to run that simulation with 1,000 GPM pumped in there, and we're going to see what kind of results pop out of that. What's going to pop up for me first here is I'm going to get a hydrant curve that's going to show me, essentially what that should look like. Okay, cool. So you'll see that pop up on your screen. And so this is pretty neat. So I can see at that particular location, right? Depending on what the required fire flow is, it's going to give me the curve. And so it's showing me right here, I'm going to get about 1,800 GPM with getting a residual, pressure down to 20 PSI for that particular location, right? So yes, I can meet the fire flow, right? And I've got all the other sort of summary statistics built up in there for me. Same idea if I come over here to impact and I want to see, hey, what's going to be the impact of that? Let's see, we'll close these out so you can see a little bit better. And you see the red dots pop up on the screen. And, as you would expect, if I tried to get 500 GPM out of that location or 1,000 GPM out of that location, that's what it would look like, right? Now, let's do this. Let's see what happens if I lose one of these pipes coming into this area here. So let's say I come over here, and this pipe that I've selected down here, and I need to see what happens now. I'm going to come in, and you see my choices change based on what I've got selected. So I've got that pipe selected, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that particular pipe right there. Say done. So now I'm going to run a simulation with 1,000 GPM fire flow coming over here, right? And I'm going to close a pipe coming into this park complex here, right? So one of the things that I have seen folks doing is in an effort to, like I said, to sort of expediently get their things done for their AWIA piece is that they've got staff at the utility that can run these kind of analysis looking at their critical customers, right? And as they start building in an emergency response plan to be able to say, okay, hey, we've identified this problem, this problem, this problem, and now I've got tools that I can start running that kind of analysis on things. Or I've seen some of our folks in California that have utilities that run through fault lines, and being able to, I throw those fault lines in there and then individually start looking at, okay, depending on what happened from an earthquake, where am I going to see, if I lose this pipe, what happens? If I lose this pipe, what happens? If I start losing, combinations of them, how does that affect things? And again, you're able to run that right from that browser. So you see here, we're still going to be able to meet fire flow. A lot of redundancy in that system coming in there. Instead of getting to, 1,800 though, we're, down to 17 or 1,860, whatever it was. We're only at 1,790 from we're only from assessing the slightly less fire flow. And if we come back over to the impact, we'll see some updated results that, show if the pressure drops a little bit more. But you get the idea how you can run that analysis piece in here. Okay, let me hop in and show you one more piece that's tied into all this that is helpful. And I'll answer some questions in here as well too. So one of the questions is, is Sedaru an extension or an add-on to GIS? does it only work with GIS platforms? Really good question, right? And I sort of glossed over this jumping into these tools, right? You're looking at these pipes. You're looking at a distribution system that's spread out here. Sedaru is built on top of the Esri GIS platform, right? So I've got the ability to directly consume GIS information. Whole bunch of different ways to do that, whether that's coming from a static geodatabase, whether that's coming from live published web services, but it is built off of GIS information. When I'm talking about a hydraulic model, though, that is actually using the hydraulic modeling framework. So in a Sedaru modeling perspective, it's actually bringing in and using EPANet as the sort of core hydraulic engine. It uses an EPANet INP to be able to uses an EPANet INP to build that, right? And so I can have here, I just turned on my GIS to go with this, right? And I'll just kind of pop it off here so you guys can see what the difference is here that looks like. And I'll turn it back on here, GIS, right? So what's interesting is that your model and your GIS can be two separate things, right? And they are two separate things, but oftentimes your model is built directly from your GIS. But in this case, if we look at this little area here, right? You got these little green dots that are nodes from the model, right? And then I've got the pipe overlay is the same, right? So a model pipe and the GIS pipe is the same. But then I've got all these meters and all these service laterals you see in here. And if I shut my GIS off, you'll notice those meters go away. And so essentially what's happening here is the meters, the demand, the information from those meters is getting applied to the hydraulic model, and it simplifies and makes the model easier to use. So you have that, you can work with both together. So the short answer to that is you can run this using just the hydraulic model. You can run this piece using just the GIS, or use a combination of those things. Together. And let's see, I had another question pop up in here that said, is Sedaru considered a CMMS? Here's a good question. Let me get back to that. I'm going to hit on that in a second. And for those of you who don't know, CMMS stands for Computerized Maintenance Management System, which is an acronym to describe some different software products. But yeah, it's a good question. So I'll hit on that momentarily in here. All right, let me show you one other sort of tool that's again sort of related to all these things. So this is another part of the Sedaru software suite that's called Sedaru CIP. Okay, and so what Sedaru CIP is designed to do is to give you a way to manage all this data that's coming in that you're collecting in all kinds of places, and then to use it and apply it to make smarter capital planning decisions, right? So it lets you build risk-based capital plans. And so with that, we're typically looking at things like likelihood of failure. We're looking at things like consequence of failure, right? And then you're combining those into to risk and to try to build projects and to do some of those pieces in there, right? So Sedaru CIP lets you do all that, right? And there's certainly a big piece of CIP that you can apply to your AWIA planning pieces as well. So you see across the top, you've got these buttons, performance, impact, et cetera, right? So performance is really geared around likelihood of failure criteria. So I'm thinking of things like pipe age and material, all those sort of pieces, right? So I'm not gonna hit on that because we're really talking more on the consequence of failure side, right? So let's think about some things really simply here, right? If you have pipes in your system that carry a lot of flow, the consequence of failure of that is probably typically higher. The impact of that failing is typically higher. You've got customers, right? So how many customers get affected, right? What's the number of valves that have to be affected, right? On a typical day, right? What's the amount of water volume conveyed, right? What's the average amount of demand that's going to be conveyed, right? So these are just example sort of criteria. You can really utilize within CIP just about any GIS attribute that you have, or any sort of hydraulic modeling derived criteria, including things like hydraulic criticality, some of that stuff. So you can use that. And essentially what you're doing is you can build your own criteria in here, right? So your own scoring. So in this case, we've got a criteria built that's based 50% off of customers affected, and then 50% off of the average demand that's been affected, right? And I can sort of play with these sliders, and I can come in and add new criteria. And the idea here is that you spend a lot of time defining methodology for what makes something critical, what makes it important, and then you can update your data as you're going through there. So for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of just hop over here to the action plan, right? And so the action plan pulls a bunch of this information together. And let me come over here. Whoops. Go back over to assets here. Let this load in a second. So we're going to look at the asset list here. All right. And so now what happens is it's like it's going to go through and it's going to do calculations for me for every pipe in my system, right? So again, another place where we're building a database of critical pipes in the system and how you're going to apply those and use those in your in here. And so I'll just, one of these, the second pipe in here, you see it has a likelihood of skid failure score of 2.3, an impact score of 5. I can come over to here and I can see exactly where that came from. You know, pipe age was part of it, material type, number of customers affected was pretty high. The average demand for that section was pretty high. And again, whatever criteria you come up with and utilize in there. And then I'm going to be able to pull all that information up on the map as well too, right? And have them all ranked in here. So instead of just looking at them in a table form, I can come in and I'll drill in and say, okay, hey, what's up with pipe, the 4th ranked pipe in my system? Okay, what did that look like? And here's the 10th ranked pipe, and I can come in and, you know, start seeing all the details around that. And then we do some things to kind of merge these into projects as well too, which is a whole nother piece. At some point, we'll do a Sedaru live that's just focused around all the CIP pieces here. But the neat thing around this is that if we go back to our criteria view, is you can get with CIP all of this underlying data, right? All of this breakdown information. Okay, what is the consequence of failure scoring for all the pipes in my system? You know, basically define all these criteria however you want. And I got this little, you know, export data button over here, and I can bring it right out of this easy to use web browser application and put it into whatever other deliverable I'm using to meet my AWIA requirements in here. All right. Let's see, a couple other questions in here that we got to hit on. Yeah, and we're running short on time here, so I got a couple other things to quickly share with you, and then answer questions. So go ahead and fire those questions away in there. Let's see. Oh, so good question. So can Sedaru modeling work with hydraulic models made in any other software other than EPANet? Really good question, right? So what's neat is that most of the water distribution-based hydraulic modeling software applications all have exports to EPANet. EPANet, at least within the United States, has become a de facto standard for a lot of these things. So everybody's got a way to use EPANet, and it makes hydraulic models portable between a bunch of different software applications. And so that is the general method in which to do that. We also, from a services perspective, we do a lot of hydraulic modeling work as sub-consultants for engineers and also directly for utilities, wherever we're asked. And so we will help folks with their models if they need to sort of be spiffed up a little bit to use within the Sedaru modeling application. We can do that piece in here as well too. There's also sort of Sedaru modeling work for collection systems as well. Short answer to that is not yet. So Certainly in the realm of things that we want to get to from the Sedaru side of things, that's certainly one of the pieces in terms of being able to run a collection system-based hydraulic model would be great right from a web browser. What we do today, though, which is great, and I think really also can be applicable to these kind of risk and resiliency studies. It's just not it's not the same regulatory requirement, but there's certainly plenty of regulatory requirements on the collections side anyway. But you can do this same kind of CIP analysis directly with your collection system. So I can, what's neat there though, is I can do things like give me, for every pipe in my system, tell me how many customers are affected upstream. And who's affected, by that being out, and are those critical customers, and how much flow upstream, and all those kind of things. So it knows how to do the upstream trace and to do that network analysis. You also can combine CCTV data and a bunch of those other pieces on the collection system side as well. So you really can get quite a robust set of information, out of that, so, which is really helpful. All right, wrapping up here, let me hit on a couple other things real quick. Let's see, I want to get out of this application. All right. Hitting back on, just quickly on the AWIA pieces. So couple key points on some of this, right? So folks that don't know, you're going to be required to develop the risk and emergency response plans. That's really sort of the biggest driver out of this. And then these deadlines are key, right? So larger cities, clock's ticking, right? I mean, everybody's working to try to get these things done if you're at the larger places. Many of your medium-sized places, you're starting that you got to get something done this year. So this is certainly a front burner item working on it. And so you've got that ability to do that and to bring that in here. So I want folks to remind folks to understand those key deadlines, and then really right after that, you got to get your emergency response plans done. So one of the things, so back to that question around is Sedaru a CMMS application? I wanted to mention this, right? And if you've talked to folks at Sedaru, you've heard them probably talk around this concept a little bit. We bring it up in different avenues, but this idea of drops, right? And what this really means is that we try to stay away from these conversations of like is something a CMMS package, right? CMMS meaning like maintenance management or work order management, right? And the reality is that does Sedaru let you do work orders? Absolutely. Does Sedaru let you do track labor, equipment, materials, and does you do field data collection and all of those pieces? So could you technically say it's a CMMS package? I guess, right? But that in and of itself, we find it's a fairly limiting definition of what you can do with things, right? And the idea is that most public utilities, most water utilities, sewer utilities, and for that matter, like cities and public works, are all driving towards this idea of being a smart city, a smart utility, the self-driving automated utility. And what Sedaru is really doing is looking for the way to help you wherever you're at on that journey to get there, to have a set of software tools that can get you there, right? So if you want to be making and using all your data to make preemptive decisions and to head things off at the pass, right, is great. But if you're still collecting half of your data on paper, right, then you're going to have a really hard time getting there, right? So Sedaru is designed to help you with that piece, right? So we're talking today really about tools and applications that are how do I apply using all this data, right? I've got a model and I want to use more with it. I've got a GIS data and I'm managing main breaks and I want to use that to understand risk and resiliency and do all that. So these are kind of pieces that fall over in this kind of OPP section of drops, right? And then you've got more sort of core pieces that are work order management, that are real-time data collection applications pieces as well too. So the cool part about that is if you were looking at what we have and say, man, this is awesome because I'm already doing the D&R piece of this really well. I'm already collecting data in real time. I've got my work orders are all squared away. My skate is tied in with everything, all these sort of pieces. You can still use Sedaru to apply it, right? And to get more out of that information. If you still need help on that D&R piece, we can certainly help on that side as well too, right? So there's a lot of flexibility. A lot of flexibility there. All right, last couple questions here, and we'll work to wrap up. So questions around GIS models, are they important to Sedaru? Yeah, update the original GIS. So good question, right? So hydraulic models, there's no live update of the hydraulic model per se, right? So hydraulic model, you are saying, hey, here's the next version of the hydraulic model I want to use. I'm going to import it into Sedaru and let's do it. There's a lot of real practical reasons around that, because, which I won't get into now, but happy to sort of talk about more and get into the weeds on that. From a GIS side of things, you've got a couple options. So Sedaru can dynamically consume GIS services, right? So that means you could be running like an Esri portal, for example, and Sedaru can be integrated right to that Esri portal. And every time your GIS updates, you're looking at live GIS in Sedaru, right? So really straightforward way to do that. For folks that have made an investment in Esri software and Esri licensing, I say, great, let's do that. Let's leverage it. Let's use it, right? If you don't have that kind of GIS investment, you have the ability to host and run it all within Sedaru as well too. So you could essentially import a geodatabase, that static set of information, have that available to you in Sedaru. Use Sedaru to manage work orders. Use Sedaru to run your model, to do all this other stuff and make edits to that. But you're running that off a hosted copy of the GIS that could be static. So you've got a bunch of different options there. Let's see. Last couple questions here. Out of these Sedaru applications, which one would you prioritize to use first? Man, that's a really tough question, right? So, I mean, there's no straight answer to that, to say, hey, just, pick this one first, right? I do like the idea, and we talk to folks again about this drops concept all the time. So it's really, what problem are you trying to solve? Like, what's your front burner problem that you've got to figure out? And then what's the right way? What's the right way to get there, right? If somebody said to me like, hey, I've got this AWIA deadline ticking away on me and I have got to get going on some of these pieces, and to do it, the Sedaru Outage tool is the easiest to just say, I think you get the most sort of bang for the buck there. You're going to take your GIS as it exists today. You're going to get that in there. You're going to be able to get some consequence of failure scoring that comes out of that. And you're just going to be able to hit the ground running and go straight from there. So, but we're happy to have those kinds of conversations in there as well too. Let's see. I think we hit all the questions in here. There's a question in here about integrating with an application. I'm not sure specifically on that particular application, but certainly I can dig in a little bit more. In general, Sedaru, we've got a pretty robust framework that lets you integrate and pull in with a lot of different billing systems. Billing systems is really the most common integration, right? So you're trying to sort of merge what you have for service requests with work orders, and have that along with a whole bunch of different SCADA systems, metering information, all of that. It's really another sort of core idea with Sedaru is, how do I bring a lot of this information together in there as well too. And there was some questions around, are we going to do specific webinars around other applications? Yeah, I mean, we're every 2 weeks right now, we're really looking to do one of these short webinars. We're hitting a whole suite of different applications. I think next, or 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk, I think, about how you can use Sedaru, what's called Sedaru Omni and Field Force, to manage one-call locate tickets. So from like a work order perspective, be able to bring in those tickets from your state one call center, or your regional one call center, and then use Sedaru to resolve them and do those work orders. So we'll hit on those kind of topics as well too. But everybody who's attended today will get a follow-up email from us. You'll get a link to this webinar as well too, so you can share that with your other staff. And we're happy to have any kind of follow-up conversations with you as well too, and look forward to continuing the conversation. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. I hope this was educational, and look forward to discussing this all of this in more detail with you in the near future. Thanks again, everybody.